Well, good morning and good afternoon, members and guests of the Cybersecurity Collaborative. I'm Tom Skura, Vice President of Content and Programs with the Cybersecurity Collaborative, and I'd like to welcome you to a CISO's Guide to Effective Vulnerability Management today. Before we get into our discussion topics and content, just a couple of housekeeping rules here. If you have any questions, by all means, put them in the Q&A chat, and our panelists will get to it, some during the discussion and some at the end. Again, there's an awful lot of material that's presented here. We like to show the work of the working group, but it's an awful lot to consume during the course of an hour. That said, members of the collaborative will have access to these copies in the member portal. Guests, if you would like a copy, please, at the end of this, we'll provide you an email and we will send you a copy of the material. There's some very, very good points that have come out of the team that I think will be very useful to you, as well as some slides as you make a case for enhancing your own vulnerability management program. With that, I would like to introduce our executive sponsor, Kristina Belnap. She's a Senior Vice President and CISO of HealthEquity. HealthEquity has been with a collaborative. We really, really have appreciated the team members that have participated in our task forces, particularly this one. So Kristina, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself and your company, and then if you would just call out the four member panelists that we have today so that they can introduce themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. I'm Kristina Belnap. I am, as he said, the Chief Information Security Officer here at HealthEquity. And HealthEquity is the #1 provider of health savings accounts in the United States. But we also do other benefits such as COBRA and commuter benefits. We joined the Cybersecurity Collaborative because we saw the immediate benefit of being able to collaborate with our peers and understand and get advice from others who are in the same issue, in the same areas that we are, and working through the same things. Particularly, one of the things that I like is the vulnerability management. We get a lot from our membership. Every morning I get up and the first thing I see on my computer is the morning update on all of the different security issues that are happening, which is really great because then if any of my executives come at me, I'm already prepared and ready to go. I also have like a Slack channel so I can communicate directly with some of my peers. Some of the things that I also really like is the ability to have some training from them. Participate in things like incident response exercises, which are always good, really great to have. I was particularly interested in this vulnerability task force, as that is such a very important part of security, but also a very challenging part of security. So being able to participate and hear what other people are doing or how they were doing it, or to come up with some really good ideas, was such a great idea to me. So this team was organized in July, and they met weekly to discuss issues and best practices, and some of that's going to be shared with you today. So I would like to introduce the rest of the members of the task force who are going to be the panelists today. First is Michael Flores, and he is also from HealthEquity. He's on our vulnerability management team. And then there's John Nagengast. I'm terrible with names. He is from, make sure I say it right, he is a Senior Information Security Architect at Penn National Insurance. Also Jeremy Rowley, who is a vulnerability management at Lenovo and Motorola Mobility. And then Brad Skribeck, I'm terrible with this, also from Lenovo and Motorola Mobility, and he's in the risk and vulnerability management program there.
Okay, thank you. Kristina, thank you for your leadership. Also for Mike, for John, Jeremy, and Brad, thank you for being here today. We look forward to your comments and insights as we go along here, and we appreciate the insights that you provided to this team that are reflected in the outcome and output today. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Cybersecurity Collaborative, I just wanted to spend a minute talking to you about the value proposition we have. First of all, the premise of the group is that we as cybersecurity professionals, despite we're in various industries, have opportunities to collaborate on different security issues and challenges. and we can learn from each other because we're all in different stages. On the AI team there's some members that are further down the line in terms of governance, others just starting up, on that track. As a result of that, members can get good ideas from other members. So the learning opportunities and collaborative opportunities come in many ways. One is through these task forces, specific groups working on a specific security domain over an 8 to 10 week period, as we did with the Vulnerability Management Task Force. But it isn't just that being a vehicle for collaboration. We have a Slack channel. Members can Slack each other and communicate and ask questions and talk about tools that they're using or any other thing. We have rapid action responses. CISOs can reach out to other CISOs and members and get a rapid response to their questions. We also have the daily morning security report, as Kristina mentioned. As CISOs, you don't want to go into a session. Someone says, "Did you hear about this kind of a breach here, and how are we handling it without being aware that something happened?" And you get this every morning at 6:30 EST in your email, and that way you get a brief summary of major events, vulnerabilities, legislation. It's a comprehensive set of information that comes from the benefit of being a part of a larger organization, the Cyber Risk Alliance. We have a library of CISO developed tools, which I'll go over, and resources that you can use to improve aspects of your program. Another thing is when you join, you also have the benefit of a 12-week cybersecurity leadership program. It's very important as CISOs that we develop people to eventually become CISOs and move up in the organization. This is a leadership program. It's got its stamp marked by General Colin Powell, when he was alive, participated in this. And it ends and concludes with a incident simulation. So you can see how to respond with peers from other organizations and how they do that. So our proposition, to summarize, when we collaborate and work together, we become stronger. So let me talk about the topics we're going to talk about today. Background on the task force, we'll go over that a little bit. Vulnerability management definition and scope. Just briefly, talk a little bit about how it's defined by NIST and others. And it's a broad scope topic. So what we're doing here is really focusing on vulnerability management components and how you kind of mature and improve those components. And we'll go over those today. The importance of vulnerability management to an effective cybersecurity program. We'll show you a couple of slides based upon industry research and what companies are being asked now to prove about their vulnerability management programs. As I mentioned, there are several components. We'll describe them. We'll provide some implementation and operational guidance. And then we'll step back and look at it from another way, and that is in terms of the environments that we're trying to manage, the vulnerability management environments, on-prem, cloud, third parties, apps, what key strategies and takeaways can we give you to help manage those environments? We could spend days on them, but we've gotten some good guidance out of that. Summary, we'll just show up a summary slide. You can answer it. How effective is your program along a maturity spectrum? We'll go over the deliverables of the task force, initiatives and key content, and then we'll get a little time for a panel discussion as we go through here. So let me just, I'm going to talk to the panelists. We had a small but very, very concerted, engaged team that worked on vulnerability management here. We don't believe it should only be industry-based. We look at cross industries. We get great insights from others. I will say on the AI task force that we're doing now, even universities and government agencies are providing some tremendous insights to businesses. It isn't just the other way, or there's not a barrier amongst them. So that's why we have organizations across all industries and government agencies join here, and we get value from them. Members share successes, false starts, and challenges. We're all under NDA. One of the things that I find out is you can really get down to and talk the nitty-gritty in these task forces. So if you're implementing a particular tool and having some issues, you will find that another member has an answer to, oh, we solved it this way. then you can collaborate independently of these task forces and continue on in those discussions to address your challenges. And I think even though we try to come up with deliverables, we do also come up with them, not just try. There is tremendous value from collaboration on these things, as much as we get from the outputs that we're showing here. So I'm just going to open the panelist discussion. Tell me, if you could, what you got from meeting with other members of your peer organizations on a weekly basis to discuss vulnerability management issues. Anyone want to comment?
I will. So Brad and I work together, and we often have things that we bring up to each other, but it's a lot of times just talking into an echo chamber. And with this group, while some of the times it is just a larger echo chamber, sometimes we challenge each other, and that kind of broadens our horizons a bit. Our scope becomes a little bit larger.
Good.
Just to add to that real quick too, you know, one of the things that you will note about vulnerability management, if you've done it long enough, is it's pretty much an acquired taste in this industry. As witnessed by, go to any conference and see how many talks there are on vulnerability management. It'll be pretty small, 1%.
I agree.
And so, you know, having other people to bounce ideas off of and collaborate with is really important for us, because we can't live this in a vacuum. It's really hard to do in a vacuum. So,
Brad, your analogy to an acquired taste and, you know, interest is a very good point. When you look at how important this is to a security program, we wish we were talking about a little bit more in the context of it. Part of the problem is it's so vast, you know,
right.
It's a vast problem. But there's certain things I think, as we see here, you can do to make it effective and go along. And that's what we're hoping the audience will take away. But I love your analogy there. Thank you. Anyone else before we move on? Sure.
Yeah, Tom, I would say, you know, that the collaborative has been great for, you know, our organization to kind of, you know, to Jeremy's point, right, just validate, you know, some of the things you have in place, right, your programs, and be able to talk to your peers and say, okay, we're doing okay. And, you know, I've been on multiple task force, the vulnerability management, ransomware task force, and some of the other programs you talked about as well, right? The leadership program, I've been through that, was just recently through a ransomware simulation that was put on by the collaborative, which was great. So, you know, and I still, even outside these task force and the collaborative, you know, I build this peer network and still kind of, you know, touch base and keep in touch with individuals, and, you know, have a network to bounce ideas off, and yeah, it's been great.
Well, and John, you've been a great participant on many of these things, but I think you give and you get by doing that, and you build other peer relationships beyond just attending these task forces that will serve you as you go along in your career. And I think that's a unique opportunity to do it here. So, well, thank you for sharing that. So let's get on to some of this stuff. I'll just go through quickly. It's here, as I mentioned, in slides that people can take and use in their own presentations. By all means, feel free to do that. We can take a look at the NIST definition of vulnerability and recognize that it's much broader than the technical side that we're really focusing on here today. And clearly, when you do a risk assessment, you're kind of looking at the broader view of vulnerabilities. But it's interesting, if you just take a Wikipedia view, they're talking about software vulnerabilities. So the scope on this is, and this is part of the reason that it's an acquired taste, is it's very, very challenging. It's in all aspects of the environment, of assets and software. And it's something that you have to continually manage, which is why I think people sometimes shy away from it and don't want to talk about it for that reason. But there are some precepts to your program that you really have to keep in mind to continually improve and strengthen this. And it is extremely important to do so. I just want to say here, for members of the audience, we focused on best practices managing for the software vulnerability side in IT data centers. We did talk a little bit about third parties and the development side, and we do have separate guidance on that. And we are having an OT task force we're standing up, operational technology. We will be talking about vulnerability management within that particular environment. We didn't address it here, although the principles are the same. And I just want to call to your attention a couple key industry statistics referencing the Verizon data breach investigations report, which is a well-known report that people use, 2023. Again, the means of coming in, exploiting vulnerabilities is still a key way of getting in. It used to be people think I don't have to worry about it so much because I have to worry about credentials and two-factor and phishing. But on the other hand, exploiting vulnerabilities, you'll find from websites, going into websites is a problem as well. But also, once someone gets in, they can exploit vulnerabilities within your environment. So it is at the top level here and extremely important. And this is just another example. We're not all in the virtual currency business, but again, someone standing up something like virtual currency in web applications, that's how they're exploited, through vulnerabilities in those applications. So, again, one way to look at it is, yes, these vulnerabilities are being exploited. And it's important that we keep going and addressing them. I just want to bring something up that's very personal, and it may be affecting all of you, just to show you how vulnerabilities are. People recall the Move It vulnerability and warned of an SQL injection. And again, if you look at SQL, Target, Yahoo, Zappos, Equifax, all have been affected by that. It was a 0-day vulnerability exploited by a ransomware group. And it may not have affected you directly, but let me tell you this. I just got a notice from my electric company saying that it's not your social security number, but everything else about my usage is out there. And I'm sure I'm going to be getting a lot of people coming and saying I can cut it back. I also got a second one from a financial services organization. Here's an example of something that was prevalent. It's a file transfer program, pervasive and used in third parties. And it's real, okay, exploited. And now this company has to go out and tell me that I had a breach. If it had been personal information, so they say it wasn't, they would have been offering me all kinds of other services to try to deal with it. So it's another example that whether or not it's an acquired taste, it's a taste you have to have and deal with it. The third thing is, look at it from a business standpoint. I mean, in terms of what the CISO and you were doing. If you're getting leading, here's some TPRM questions from a leading financial services organization. You're now being asked about your program and patching. And these are actual questions that are being asked for companies that are trying to get business, their customers, and not customers, the suppliers coming to this financial organization. Do you patch critical vulnerabilities ASAP? They use the word ASAP, 7 days, whatever. What is your patching cadence? Please provide a latest copy of the scan and penetration test. Oh, by the way, make sure all critical high vulnerabilities are taken care of. There are also independent measurements that are being used. Again, you can see here, patching cadence is one of them on here. And you're getting questions from cyber insurance underwriters as well. They want to, each year, there are more poignant questions are being asked around this. They're asking for proof you're doing what you say, and they'll also give you a security rating. So maybe we all understand as practitioners that this is important, but when you look at the breaches and that vulnerabilities are a cause and a vector for breaches, when you look at what actually happens in terms of personal situations as a result of a breach vulnerability, and when you look at what you're being asked by your customers, it is extremely important that you have a well-defined vulnerability management program. Patching is a part of it. It's not all of it, you'll see. But for your business and protecting the security of your business, it is extremely important.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention on that really quick too is that
Sure.
a note, the bit site ratings, if you look at that, patching cadence is probably the center of our world. But most people who do vulnerability management are so involved in almost every category on that bit site rating. Because I'm looking at like user configurations, they configured software poorly, SSL certificates for sure. You know, I'm in probably 80 to 90% of those categories almost all the time. So you know, patching cadence is probably the center of our universe, but it's not the only thing in our universe at all, which is what makes vulnerability management such a challenge because
No.
we're spread pretty thin.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. It's just one of the many open ports. Yeah, that's an example of, of a configuration issues and so forth. So well
It-
said.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
Tom, I just wanted to kind of comment on your points about the cybersecurity insurance, right? Underwriting in that for getting that. A lot of us have, cybersecurity insurance, and they are getting better. Well, they're asking tougher questions, right? And it's kind of a two-edged sword, right? It's tough if you can't answer the question, right? Yes, there goes your premiums. But on the other side, it also gives you, that kind of teeth to help push some of these programs through, right? And get buy-in on them. And we use that, right? We'll say, hey, our cybersecurity insurance carriers, requiring this now, right? MFA and a vulnerability management program. So, if you're going to go and you can't answer the question that you have one, maybe it's time, that management buys in and you have one. Right. So
Brad and John, excellent points. And to your point, John, you're beginning to answer the question, how do I make a case for expanding my program? The cyber insurance underwriters are starting to make that case for you. Also is what in terms of what customers are asking. If you look, again, if you're a supplier, they are beginning to ask these questions about that and digging under the covers. So very, very good points. So now I want to take a step back and everyone look at VMP components. Some of them may sound very basic, but they all have got to be there and working. And in some organizations, they're not. And that's why vulnerability management becomes whack-a-mole, an ad hoc process. But you do need an organization, a VM team, full-time or part-time of some sorts. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Budgets are always difficult to deal with. Ideally, if you have a budget that's defined here, people say it becomes a target. But when you don't have a budget, what happens is you don't have a budget, and all of a sudden you realize you don't have a budget, you don't have the money. So having something defined in this is better than not. The stakeholders, the thing that makes this challenging is that, we're the team that identifies the vulnerabilities, but we're not just the team that's basically going to fix them. And that team that's going to fix them is also going to be, standing up new instances and doing other things and have competing priorities. And the other thing too is you need governance, policy, standards, procedures, charters, if you want to do that. But you need some oversight to make sure that these things are getting done. And when they're not, there's some kind of an escalation procedure. So there are 4 components to an organization that spans beyond the VM team. The second series of components are processes, the VM lifecycle processes. You can see these diagrams over the place. But this is what the team is doing all the time. Could be doing continuously, cyclically. We'll go into these best practices in some of these areas. But this has to all work well. If it doesn't work well, you're just going to be, again, identifying the same things identified before if you don't have governance and other processes in place. Remediation SLAs. Extremely important that it isn't that we found a critical vulnerability, let's address it. Well, it's been there for 6 months. You really have to say, this is the time frame we need to address these things. And by the way, we missed it. Why and what are we doing about it? And have those conversations for some sense of urgency to address these things because the exploitability is there. And then metrics. We'll show an example of some metrics, one metric example that you can use to help manage this process and drive to the remediation side. The last thing is it is all about tools, and you're not going to do this without the use of scanners, some administration tools, Excel, whatever you might do. And we'll talk a little bit about the challenge and why you have to stay abreast of those things. So again, all these things have to be in place and be working together to be effective. The organization, I'm going to go through this quickly. This talks about a team, ideally within the cybersecurity organization. I think all of our members had that. I talked about the budget, the members and stakeholders. And this is just a graphic, a little bit of how these work together. The board of directors isn't going to, what people report on VM is a component, or, to say we're patching or we're doing our stuff in time, it'll be a component of something that's presented overall. But I will say, if there's a major vulnerability out there like Log4j or SolarWinds, it does get attention, and the CISO is going to go there and saying, what are we doing about it? Then there's the governance organization that reviews the SLA metrics, addresses the escalations. The VM team is continually assessing, and then the remediation team. So it's kind of another take on that. I love this that we came up with. If you don't have the resources, you're paving the road you're driving on. And in this, I have to say, maybe that was yours, John, but it's like, you do need the resources to do this. It is not just the people, but their commitment to mitigating, to doing these things, especially since they may have multiple functions, and that management is overseeing that commitment. I found, I'll just talk a little bit about the organization. Among the team members, we have like, some had dedicated teams, so the manager and analysts. For it's hard to draw a line and correlate size to teams, but there were, out of the people that we surveyed, 3 of 5 had dedicated teams. Others did not. They had staff, but not a formal VM team. But there were people assigned to this. What I liked here was a member best practice was an advanced security assessment team, the ASAT team, that met monthly, looked at the threat landscape, took threats in, was run by the security team. There were 10 individuals from different areas and support, and they discussed ad hoc vulnerability remediation like Windows updates. So there was some governance over that, but also looked at the threat side of that. All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about, we'll talk about some of the VM components. Let me go through these quickly, some of the guidance. Again, you'll get these slides. These are some of the identification sources. Team member best practices. I'll go through them quickly. Integrate with an asset management program. Everyone's trying to do that. If you know what you have, you know what to scan. And if that works well, it makes your tasks easier. Perform inventory scans. There are tools like ServiceNow and Avanti that help do that. Move toward authenticated and continuous scanning. It's expensive, and there are agents on the machines. We know the issues with that, but it's a way to identify what is currently there on a known asset. Leverage third-party service for informing you of key vulnerabilities. Some organizations might have the scanners do that, but they brought in third-party services to call out key vulnerabilities, and they could prioritize them as the best practices, and employ virtual images to reduce scanning overheads. Any other, in terms of identification of these things, anything else, members, that you might say in terms of best practices?
No, I think you hit most of the points there, Tom. I know, I think you're going to discuss this coming up, so I don't want to steal your thunder there, but, kind of integration, best practices for your vulnerability management as an integration into your patch management process as well, right? To help your vulnerability management, validate your patch management process and all that. I think that's important to kind of tie those two together.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, and I'll bring that up. And you showed how to do that in terms of a scanning cadence, which we'll talk a little bit in general that folks have. In terms of assessing and prioritizing, this becomes a challenge in terms of assessing and prioritizing, but you need to develop risk categories clearly. Some said CVS score of 8+, and then if it's exploitable. Others took that, if it's exploitable, and then look at their scanner risk ratings as well. and then he set up remediation SLA. So most of us, you do need some criteria because you need to prioritize what you're going to do, or you'll never get any of this done. And some of the best practices here that came up: perform automated daily syncs with tickets for new vulnerability information. So you're doing this daily. Tie the remediation to a specific owner, an asset owner. You got to put the name and organization and on it, or obviously it doesn't get done. Grouping findings into a single ticket by priority, by asset, so that makes it easier for the remediation teams to address these things. Integrating with existing ticketing systems like Jira. Ensure that the ticket provides or references information to allow the asset owner to completely remediate the vulnerability. Actually tying into the information in the scanner and giving them access was a way to do that. If it cannot be cost effectively remediated, discuss at review venues and identifying compensating controls. The thing is, using agents on boxes, you're going to find more issues, but I think it gives you fewer false positives. Any other guidance on managing false positives? I mean, other than, agents seem to be a good way to do that, although you can't apply them elsewhere. Any thoughts on that? Because I know that's always a concern with scanners.
Well, and agents aren't immune, unfortunately. I mean, even with agents, you still get some false positive rating. I think that for us, we kind of take them. Most of the tools that we're using all have the ability to assign a false positive. We then have a flow that goes back to the vendor saying, hey, we're getting this false positive. Please look at this and determine whether we could do better. Right.
Oh, that's a good practice. Excellent.
Yeah, because you have to, hopefully the vendor is happy about that, because you're basically telling them how to make their product better. So it makes sense.
So giving feedback is a great best practice. Thank you. We'll add that to that. Let me move on. Yeah, go ahead.
Really quick on false positives. We've integrated that process into the exception workflow. So just anything that an analyst or remediation team will come across can submit the data and supporting evidence for that. So and I guess in that perspective, it's a little more crowdsourced with our IT partners.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Brad. Good guidance. Communication to the remediation groups, usually through some ticketing system that already exists. Everyone will do it a different way, but you certainly want to send it, as we mentioned, to an owner, describe it. And I think, as I mentioned before, make sure that the remediation teams have as much information that they can to provide the remediation, which may not just simply be applying a patch. It may be a configuration change, a registry change, something as well. So that was the best practice that came up, is giving the remediation teams access to the information rather than simply recasting it and summarizing it. I think this is, to John's point, tie the remediation efforts into your past management processes. They're not separate. They work together, but if you're not applying the patches, vulnerability side will pick up on it, or if there's a problem. So, you can remediate them and applying a patch or a service pack or something. Automate some of the patching process as much as possible. There's certain services and tools like Adobe that do that for you. Remediation, as I mentioned, may not be simply applying a patch, but a configuration change. Make sure that all that is communicated, to the remediation team, that these things are done. And then again, the last thing is monitor the remediation progress, review and management meetings, escalate when necessary. We do use spreadsheets still for tracking some of these things, although some tools are trying to get better in that. And the best practice was, if you have the resource to do it, was to establish a dedicated remediation team for ensuring that things get done. I'm not saying it doesn't come without its cost. But again, when you have that dedicated team and that's what they're responsible for doing, it can be an effective way to make sure these things get done.
Just one, again, quick point.
Absolutely.
It's important. I've run into this many times. It's important to have the right level of detail.
Hmm.
One of the problems that we have is, we started out giving them, oh, hey, you have a vulnerable web server on this server. And they come back and say, well, I'm running 5 different web servers on this server. Can you tell me which one? And it never occurred to me. It's like, oh, they didn't have that detail. They didn't have the detail of which port was running. So it's like, they didn't know which one to fix. They kept on fixing the wrong one. And I kept on going, no, it's not fixed yet. It's not fixed yet. And they kept on coming back going, I just fixed it. What do you want from me? So it's important to give it's important to give the right level of detail to them and make sure that they have everything they need to do the job well. The second point I wanted to make real quick, one of the things that I find in this industry is very deficient in a lot of the tools is having the correct fix, the correct, almost every tool will suggest a fix. Having the right fix, it's not always good. I have run into many situations where, well, here's SMB, and here's how to fix it on Windows. Yeah, except this is a Linux system. Can you tell me how to fix that too? So it is a problem. They don't always give the right recommendation for that. So you have to be aware of that.
Do you go to is there another service, a third-party service that might be,
There
if you
there
can
are.
afford it? Okay.
Yeah, there's I just throwing one out.
Kenna.
Vulcan IO, Kenna, tools like that have a little bit better dedication to getting the right fix for you. Some of the tools, the scanning tools just don't have that dedication to the remediation part of it.
Right. That's a very, very good point. I'm going to take that. We'll add that to the guidance document here as well. Thank you, Brad. I'm going to move this along a little bit because I want to get into some other key stuff, and I know we can be talking about this quite a bit. The last thing is the verification processes, ensuring that patches have been applied successfully, ensuring that all remediations have been taken, that need to do that. And I love Brad's point about not relying solely on the tools. They may not have everything in that. And if going back and forth, you spend cycles when you don't have that information. Escalations are very important. Rescans as a primary and direct means of verification came up. Identify a tool as a source of truth to know that you've verified something's been done. You might have to examine the version number of the asset in terms of the verification and dig into it a little bit. There are other ways to do this. They're indirect, yet important. You're not going to be doing pen tests every day and bug bounty programs. We can talk a little bit about it. But again, they are other ways that you still need to do it. You might find some problem, and systemically you might find that you're not really managing it in the vulnerability management program, like addressing all things that need to be remediated. So feedback from pen tests and bug bounties, very important. The other thing I want to point is remediation, SLA, and metrics. Here's something that came out of the security metrics team, which we run as well. And someone said, I'm going to start doing this. One way that's very effective, I know at a very high level, you got to get down into specific things, but set an objective for the time frame for remediating vulnerabilities based upon risk category. And you can set it, you can say, I'm going to have 80%, that's my objective. Maybe you want to make it higher. And you can run it on a monthly basis and hopefully you're trending up here, or you can do cumulative and set a longer term goal if your team is not mature enough. But it's a good way to get everyone to work together and for management to be able to know how well you're doing. The idea of remediation and SLAs and metrics is extremely important. in your program to see if you're on track or not, or improving, and a good way to get people to work together. The other thing we'll talk about, tools and scanners. The nice thing about talking about tools and scanners is that members can talk about the use of Qualys and Rapid7 and what works well and what doesn't. All that detail is captured on internal notes. They're not attributable to members, but we share them, so you get that and they talk about it. Safe to say, you're going to still be investing in these tools. And we've commented on these. Tools do not provide some complete functionality. They're trying to provide some integrations. You're still using spreadsheets. And some of them can be very pricey. And one quote from the CISO was, Wiz.io, the CISO loved that tool for managing vulnerabilities in the cloud, just absolutely raved about it, and felt that I could manage vulnerabilities in the cloud better than on-prem, and cited that. But he said that could break you. And we got into discussions about who was paying how much for which. And so the answer is they can be pricey, but you got to deal with them. You got to deal with new functionality. And someone said the asset discovery capabilities of ServiceNow are amazing, but unaffordable. So I don't know, maybe through collaboration, we get these prices down. I can't guarantee that. But it is important that you do make these investments in tools, and you can see that many of them are used. And I'll go over some of them as we get forward here. So I'm just going to wish we had a little more time. Let's just talk a little bit about on-prem management and so forth. We talked about two approaches: periodic scanning. You're going to do something on a monthly basis and run a cycle. A staggered approach is maybe not the best name, but it was a good way to say every month you're going to do an inventory scan, find new assets, you're going to tag them, you're going to add them to your inventory, you're going to look at servers one week, controllers another, and continue to run through that cycle. And that way, you're not disrupting your operational environment, but able to do your scanning and validate your patching as well. And another key thing is some pervasive middleware like Tomcat may be handled outside of the VM group and by the architectural team, because it's more complicated and it's interrelationships with applications and et cetera. And there's this idea of continuous scanning. It sounds like the Holy Grail, but I think, as Brad said, it's still going to come up with some false positives, maybe fewer, but hard to say 100%. Agents will give you more details, but also more problems. Again, it's expensive. It's putting all the agents on a box and having them compete and actually destroy the availability of the box has always been an issue. But some agents are being used, for different functions and being integrated. Two ways you can kind of look at the on-prem scanning, again, in the context of the overall program. Any comments from anyone on the team before I move on to another environment? This is what was an interesting situation in the cloud. Again, this chart is available to anyone who requests it and wants it. When you're talking about the cloud, misconfigurations are your greatest concern. It's interesting in the Verizon Data Breach report, I saw misconfigurations actually on the decline. So companies are now addressing these, interestingly. But a member mentioned that you got to worry about securing cloud APIs and talked about an issue with Graph API that came up through a pen test. So there's more than meets the mind here. Members did state with dedicated cloud teams that managing in the cloud, easier is the wrong term, but it seems to be more effective than they found than managing the on-prem environments, given the quality of the tools and the fact that members are out there using it. And then they mentioned some tools here, folks, you can look at. The collaborative is not endorsing them, but members talked about some of the value with App Omni, with AvePoint, AWS Injector, Microsoft Secure Score, and then, of course, as I mentioned, Wiz.io, which works with Azure and AWS and sits over guard duty. The table to the right is more publicly available information about some vulnerability management tools. Some of them were discussed and some not by our team member. But the point is, there are tools and ways available to manage these in the cloud that when using them, easier to set up and get working. A lot of different environments here, so I'm going to continue on. Third parties, your team is not, vulnerability management teams aren't going to deal with every aspect of third-party vulnerability management. The development groups are going to reach out to applications that provide and address vulnerabilities. Procurement or third-party risk management teams are address vulnerability management practices in third parties providing business services. However, vulnerability management teams should communicate the vulnerabilities to these teams and provide remediation oversight. I think the point is, one of the, this was mentioned here, using a risk recon or security scorecard just to keep these third parties in checks to make sure that, the third party risk management teams are on them is a good way to push forward and to the third parties and tell them, how important it is to manage vulnerabilities, even though they are on external facing assets. Let me run through quickly applications. The big takeaway here, and we've talked about the application team, is move the management process to the left. Give the responsibility applications teams, still provide notification, gatekeeping, maybe consultation. But members said Veracode is too far to the right. They shifted to Sneak and some other ways to be able to do that and get the vulnerabilities remediated before they get in production. And with acquisitions, members said, use again BitSight Security Scorecard before you integrate them to keep them honest about their vulnerability management practices. This is a way to say, hey, you're not doing this. Maybe you're not doing it on your inside either. It doesn't tell you everything, but it helps. And then we talked a little bit about bug bounty programs, which are very, very useful. The only guidance here is just expect to dedicate a person's time to this, because you gotta look, and when you're talking about paying compensation and giving rewards, someone has to figure that out, and you have to have a certain budget. But it's very useful feedback into your VM program and to your penetration testing program. So I'm going to quickly go through this so we can move on to the rest and get on to the questions. Everyone will have this. We have this as a checklist. You gauge whether or not your VM program is mature or not. These are the components. On the low side, you're missing these things. They're not in place. On the high side, they're operating. Again, the key thing here is stakeholders are responsible and they follow up. You have metrics to show whether or not you're doing these things or not. You have escalation and governance processes over that. And then you have the appropriate tool sets to be able to help with the identification and remediation processes. We're putting together a best practices guidance document with everything we've come up with here and in our specific task forces, a policy that a member provided and scrubbed, and a program maturity checklist. So you can go through and help define where you need to improve aspects of your programs. I'll quickly go here. We're going to get into the poll questions in a second and beginning to answer a couple of the Q&As and talk a little bit about improving, making the case for investment in your program. We have a number of task forces. The security metrics and benchmarks task force is ongoing. We have an AI working group, which I'll talk about a little bit. We talk a little bit about it in the policy section, certainly not enough. And we're going to talk about it more when we have the output of this working group. An OT security group is coming in 2 weeks, and we'll talk about vulnerability management in that environment. Many of the principles will take place. Organizations may or may not be different. Some of the tools may or may not be different. The challenging role of the CISO for October kickoff, as we know and Kristina knows, we're getting more involved in AI and other aspects. We have to leverage and develop our staff. How do we do that? And then we'll be getting into another domain, identity and access management, in November. Again, with other task forces that we reach out to the membership for next year, we're starting to put together. We're also looking at helping companies put an ISO, get their ISO certification support with the tools and appropriate processes to be put in place, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. So October 26th, I hope you'll look forward to joining us at 2 p.m. Eastern, when we're really putting together, we have a task force in place, and they're coming up. We're all at different places in this one, but they're really these areas that we're talking about. How does a CISO manage the AI landscape in terms of what's internally happening and outside with all the changes to ChatGPT and Cockpit and other types of AI use cases? How do we put a governance structure in there in terms of accepting requests, evaluating, looking at the security on there? How do we actually construct safe operating environments? If you're going to bring ChatGPT inside, there's an enterprise group, but what security controls do you put in place? And then lastly, how do you communicate to the board? Those 4 areas, we're coming up with good guidance and some tools for members. So we please ask that you join us then and there. And as always, as we have these task forces, we continue to build our library. This is over the past year and a half, 2 years. It's a library built on best practices from these teams and member contributed content and tools, which are extremely useful. And it helps members enhance and build their cybersecurity programs. So we continue to build that library. So I guess, Connor, maybe you want to run the poll question. Why don't we hit the audience questions, and maybe at the end we'll talk about making the case for investing. So, and Connor can put the poll questions up. Let's see what it is. Okay, so the questions are mainly around this document. Yes. I'll go to the next slide and come back to this. I'll put this up. If you'd like a copy of these slides and you're not a member of the collaborative, kindly email Tom Ward. Just take a minute and take his name down and his email address, and he'll send you a copy of this presentation. Feel free to learn from it. If you need to take some things to bring in your program to help you do it, we're all happy to do that. And while I'm here, for members of the collaborative, this will be posted in the portal. And as we finish development of the guidance document and the checklist, those will be coming out in the portal over the next few weeks. For all of you attending today, we hope if you have cybersecurity certifications that you avail yourself of the CPE credit. We're happy, for members, we kind of help keep track of that and provide those certificates. That's the benefit of membership. But again, if you're a non-member, get a presentation here. We're happy to attest to your attendance and want to help you in any other way, and hope you'll consider joining the collaborative. So hopefully that answers the questions. I don't know if we have any other open questions. So I'll just ask my panelists for any other parting comments, or how you're continuing to make the case for, we've got tools and we're kind of bringing in new tools in the cloud and trying to integrate them. And it takes time, and making the case for investing in this program so it doesn't get lost among everything else that we're doing as security professionals. So let me just ask, any guidance for the audience here and helping them go forward to improve and make the case for management support to their programs? Open-ended here. Anyone want to lead the conversation?
Yeah, Tom, this is John.
Thanks,
Yeah, so this task force, we tried to, you can go out there and you can Google vulnerability management programs and, how to put one together. But yeah, this task force is great in that we kind of are all, putting together practical experience, right, on this, and how to put together this program in a practical manner, that kind of works for organizations, right? It's going to be different based on the organization, the implementation, but, in general, the hardest part is a lot of it's a remediation, right? So it depends on how your organization's structured. With our organization, the information security unit is, we're responsible for oversight of the whole program. We run the scanning environment and all that. And then we work with our kind of infrastructure securities, enterprise architecture teams on the actual remediation, right? And you have to do it in a basis where you can't just send them a report of 50 vulnerabilities and say, here you go, have fun. It's not going to work, right? So, trying to kind of work with them. And, we do a lot of the analysis and help them kind of, figure out what needs to be remediated and offer those kind of responses on how to, possibly do that remediation to help that. And then it also needs to be tracked, and it needs kind of that governance behind it, right? So I know with ours, we have within our directors meeting with all the managers of those areas, we report on these, the status of the tracking of these, the remediation, and our CIOs in there, and also to make sure that this, that these things keep moving forward. Otherwise, you're going to send them that list and nothing's going to happen. That's where a lot of the tough part is.
John, one thing that you mentioned here that I want to hold on to and have the audience remember is this idea of working with the remediation teams is important. So they may have a question, maybe the guidance is not 100% clear. It's not just throwing it over the wall saying, fix it. That sounds like most of us don't behave and act that way, but we're also busy sometimes. It may seem that happens, but I think the idea of the VM team is a team that, is providing, here's the risk. We really need to address it. So we add that benefit, but here's what needs to be remediated. Here's the guidance I have from the tool or from Kenna or whatever it might be that will help you do this, and I think that's, and I find also too, collaboratively when we're looking at Log4j and we were running teams on that particularly one here, members were actually talking about how to remediate it. And they said, here, I did this and it didn't work. So, so you do that amongst your own teams, but even collaboratively, across the spectrum of organizations that we host, it's a very good method to do it. But your idea of working with them in collaboratively is very, very important. Otherwise, you just create animosity. So, yeah. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I tried that when I first started in vulnerability management. It was here's the 300-page report. Go ahead and go forth and remediate. It doesn't work. The people, you just make enemies that way.
Right.
Most of the time they just don't even know where to start. So I mean, my assessments usually include here's what you need to concentrate on. Do this first, and then we'll talk about the rest. And a lot of remediations beget other remediations along the line, right? I fix one thing, it fixes things down the branch. So, I like to pick out the things that fix the big bang for the buck, right? And then let's worry about the little things later.
So that's another good point, Brad, the ability to not only analyze risk, but to prioritize them in the concept of the assets at hand and what we're capable to do takes time and thought, but it ensures the success of the remediation,
right.
Doing that. I mean, the problem is if you just throw everything out there and the criticals get in with the lows and mediums, and nothing happens and prioritize, you're never going to get stuff done and you create a lot of animosity. So I like that idea of really prioritizing and seeing where you get the biggest bang for the buck, which is a good, important analyst role in the VM practice. Excellent.
I'll add one last thing here is that there's a lot of value with collaborating with being able to prioritize. And in an IT perspective, you can bring a lot of value in being able to prioritize exactly what should be remediated, but it can spawn a lot of projects and initiatives on the IT side on, when it comes to, realizing like you should continually update systems or figuring out root causes for vulnerabilities that keep popping up. So, I've seen that you can kind of help IT figure out like, oh, here's the next big project for us to tackle. It's more of an operations side of of a project, but it's definitely security driven in that case.
So that working with the IT groups to have them understand that and work with it so that they can go forward and maybe address some of these things, and so they're not so overburdened. Again, it comes down to having a relationship. You have to have the time, you have to have the staff to do it. You have to have the tools to do it. Otherwise, it becomes hit or miss. Sounds so obvious, and so much in security is obvious. It's all in the execution and making sure it doesn't get diluted with competing priorities. So with that last parting guidance, and I really thank all members of the team, Kristina, for leading us all in this effort. Thank you for some additional and great insights to this presentation and for the insights that came here. Greatly appreciated. Everyone have a great afternoon. Please reach out for a copy of this. Please reach out for more information about the collaborative, and wishing you all a great rest of the Thursday and a good weekend. Take care.
Take care. Thanks.